Hello folks, welcome back to World War II TV and the first of a double bill today. We have Andrew Whitmarsh coming back on again. He was on June the 6th talking about the D-Day story, the museum he works at in Portsmouth. He's back on tonight to talk about landing craft, the first of two parts. But today we are talking about another aspect of D-Day. And one of the things that I was quite surprised to learn is over 17,500 Royal participated on Operation Overlord on June the 6th to share their stories and explain their role as former Royal Marine Commando Si Biggs, who maintains a fantastic website that's in the description below. I'll bring you in now. Good afternoon, Si. How are you today?
Hi, Paul. Yeah, very good. Thank you. Very good. Yeah.
So tell us about the website, because you've been running it for a few years now, and so the link is in the description. But what is it you're trying to do there?
It all started with me just trying to pin what I'd done. I thought it might be nice just to get a map and put down where I've been and what I've done, just for memory's sake. And then it blew out of control. There's like 700 or 800 pins on there now. So what I do is I look into a piece of history. If I find a piece of history for Royal Marines, I'll look into it and then I'll pin it up so it goes onto a global map. And you can zoom into it and have a look at where it is and what it is. It goes from 1664 up till today. Not so many present day stuff, but I do it when I can. And then that's just gone out of control, because then I wanted to do more information, but the pin only takes so much. So it just grew and grew and grew. And now there's a blog. I've got a Roll of Honor on there with thousands of Royal Marines names all the way back to Nelson. It's just my wife goes nuts.
Well, it's good that people like you are doing that work. And I find, particularly with Americans and Canadians, the whole Army Commando, Royal Marine Commando, then there are Royal Marines who aren't commandos, and there's shipboard kind of born Marines, and it can be a bit complicated for the people who don't know the subject. But that's why you're here, to take us through it in terms of June the 6th. You've got a PowerPoint in there. Folks, fire away with questions. We'll put them to side as we go along. But basically, we're going to learn about Royal Marines on D-Day in the Battle of Normandy. So over to you, sir.
Yeah, thanks very much. So, look, just a quick cop-out. I'm a hobbyist historian, so I don't have all the details. And also, I sort of try and range all the way through the core history. But I'm particularly interested in the Second World War, as we all were when we grew up, making models and things. If I get anything slightly wrong, please let me know. And I'm also always interested, if someone else has got some information that I can put on my website or back up the stuff that's on here, then that's fantastic. So what I really want to do is sort of explain the commitment of the Royal Marines in the Second World War, and then particularly D-Day. And as you said, there was 17,500 Royal Marines during D-Day. And if you imagine only 2,000 of those were Commandos, the Commando units, then there was a lot more. And we think probably 20,000 with battle casualty replacements and follow-on flotillas and all the rest of it. It's probably about 20,000 guys engaged. So it was an absolutely massive endeavor, and the biggest in the course history. This is straight off my website. A lot of the stuff I'm going to show you is off my website. It's the easiest way for me to do it. And then some other bits and pieces that go along with it. So I'll move on to the next slide. Sorry, Paul, that's not working.
Want me to do it?
Yes, please. Yeah, if you don't mind. Yeah, that'd be great. So Royal Marines in World War II, just very briefly, we were obviously there from the start, 1939. And actually, when we had guys at Dunkirk, we had guys at Calais as well during the fight back and the withdrawal. And even one of the commanders that decided to get us out of Dunkirk and made his way over to Douvres to sort of talk about the plan was a Royal Marine. So been involved in the war right from the very start, and we're in pretty much every single major action because we had guys on ships as well. It meant we were everywhere, land and sea. 78,000 guys altogether probably served throughout the war, and about 7,500 were killed. And out of all that, we only got one VC. So unfortunately. So what we're going to talk about really is D-Day, Operation Neptune and Overlord. What I thought I'd do is just sort of break it down a little bit. There's kind of two real areas. There was the Admiralty, what was under Admiralty Command. So that was the ships and the sort of planning side from Neptune. And then you've got combined operations. So obviously Mountbatten was very keen to get the Royal Marines involved in combined operations. And actually there were Royal Marines on combined operations in Combined Operations Headquarters right from the very start. But it wasn't until later, after the Army Commandos were formed, and I'll talk about it a bit later, that we actually formed the Commandos. Royal Marines were already, that was our bread and butter anyway. I mean, we'd done cliff assaults in St Helena in the 1700s. So, you know, it was something we already did. We'd already been in Madagascar and places like that doing amphibious operations. But the core was going to be left behind if it wasn't careful. And it was Mountbatten's position in Combined Headquarters that ensured that we actually got our piece. And when we went in as commandos, like I said, there's only 2,000 commandos, but actually 5 of those commando units out of, I think it was 7 or 9, but more than 50%, I think it must be 9, more than 50% were Royal Marines. So yeah, so let's talk, sorry, I'll just go back quickly. So the two things we'll talk about, the Admiralty side first, we'll go through that, and then we'll go to Combined Operations and the Navy side. Under the Combined Operations side, Royal Marines, so if you see over to the left, you've got the Royal Marine badge there. There was still the Adjutant General Royal Marines who still commanded the Royal Marines that were involved in Combined Operations, but they did come under operational control of Combined Operations. There was the 5 units, as I said, and then raised for D-Day was Royal Marines Armour Support Group, so we had our own tanks, which I'll talk about a bit. 30 Commando, which was an assault unit, was designed specifically to go in ahead of, not ahead, sorry, with frontline combat troops and try and get information, so intelligence, Enigma, V2 rockets and V1 rockets later on, scientists, that sort of thing. And they even went up through Kiel and looked at midget submarines and trying to get hold of the German fleet before they you know, ruined all their equipment. And then we got Royal Marine Engineers, which we only saw twice really. We saw them in the First World War and we saw them again in the Second World War. And then the landing craft units. So the landing craft units talk about in a little bit of detail, but they were obviously a very large part of D-Day from our point of view. So I'll start with Neptune and the ships. So basically during the First World War, when we started to look at, or when the dreadnoughts came out and they started to look at bigger ships, they realized that the Navy couldn't actually man all the guns on the ships without huge recruitment. So what they did is they used the Royal Marines, and a lot of the Royal Marine units would have been on detachments on ship anyway, for boarding parties and things like that, and other jobs, butchers and all sorts of things. So they used the Royal Marines then to man the guns. Royal Marine Artillery and the Royal Marines Light Infantry got amalgamated in the 20s. And a lot of those extra guys were then put onto cruisers and battleships. So about a third of all large guns on the ships, some of the anti-aircraft guns and some of the smaller guns, about 50% probably, were manned by Royal Marines. Normally, the guns were labelled from the front A, B, C, and from the back X, Y, and if there was a gun in the middle, Q. So Royal Marine turrets were normally X and Y, and sometimes Q. And you'll see when we talk about the name of the troops, a lot of the commander units use those as their letters. And now 4-5 Commando is X-ray Yankee and Zulu. The X-ray and Yankee coming from the turrets.
Well, see, I've learned something already, Si. That I didn't know that. That's fantastic. I'd always wondered where that came from, but and it's now I know it's quite obvious, really. But yeah, thanks for that. Brilliant.
Yeah. So what happened when the Commandos set up? It was the colonels basically were given carte blanche to set their own units up, you know, and that's what they did. They sat there in the mess probably and said, right, what are we going to call the troops? And you know, someone who'd been in the Blue Marines probably said, oh, turret X and Y, and that's probably how it sort of came about. They didn't all do it, but most did it. On D-Day, there was, let me just have a quick look. I did write it down. So there was 3 battleships, 2 heavy cruisers, and 17 light cruisers, and they all would have had Royal Marine detachments, anywhere between sort of 80 and 140, 150 guys. And there were also 2 monitors, the Roberts and the Ibris. They're flat-bottomed vessels with large guns, and again they were Royal Marine crewed, and I'm going to talk about those in a minute. So what I thought I'd do is just break that down into these 3 vessels that I've got up here, and we'll talk about each one and what they did in particular. Erebus, in fact, is a good story. It comes out of a book about D-Day written about the Royal Marines, and there's some good bits in there. The guy that wrote the book, I haven't got it here, but I'll put it on after. He writes some good bits about Airbus. So she had a 35 Royal Marine detachment. They manned the 15-inch guns, and those 2 guns you can see on the boat there are raised up because it's flat bottomed. It's a low silhouette. They're raised up so they can get the range, and they can go out. So 1-ton shell can go out to about 22, 23 miles. The record for a shot onto a target is held by a monitor, and it was a First World War monitor, and it was fired by a Royal Marines turret, and it was onto a bridge or something in Rotterdam. It's on my website. I'll have to look it up and check. But that was a huge shot, and I think it's still got the record for the longest shot. So Airbus actually joined the American sector. She sailed from Portland with her crew on board and went to the Isle of Wight, met up at the Isle of Wight, and then sailed to the bombardment area. The interesting thing is, and if it's true, it's in the book if it's true, when they sailed away from the first RV off the Isle of Wight, they dropped a log in the water. So they dropped a weight with a line on, and they sailed by dead reckoning on a bearing towards Normandy. And once the line got to the exact amount of miles, they stopped, and they knew where they were, and that was that blue circle there, and that's where they bombarded from. So they were lobbing bombs then onto the 2 large, I can't remember what 2 emplacements they were up on there, but that's over at Omaha and Utah Beach, at the top of Utah Beach.
So they were there, and Quizbeck, I think.
Okay, yeah, and because that one's connected to Cherbourg, I think, isn't it? It's commanded from Cherbourg. So they bombed that for a couple of days. Interestingly enough, they fired so many rounds. One of the shells overheated the barrel, and one of the barrels was ruined. Well, not ruined, but had to be replaced. They sailed back to the UK, replaced a whole barrel, and this is the same sort of barrel that you might see outside the Imperial War Museum. Craned a new barrel on, and off they went again. Went back and carried on. I think they moved on to the British sector. I'll then go on to Rodney. So Rodney is a battleship, HMS Rodney, a Nelson class. She had 9 16-inch guns, so slightly more and slightly bigger than the monitors. They were offshore from the start, and they were bombarding right from day one. The range of that was 23 miles. The story here is actually against 21st Panzer, 21st Panzer Group, which were going into Esquivel, and they were threatening 6 airborne. And the story is that they, probably through SIGINT, we knew that they were going to do an attack, and were massing, and they started dropping shells. So that 3 o'clock in the morning, they started firing 78 rounds onto the Panzers, and in fact the forward area of the village. And then later in that day, they fired another 75 rounds. The story is that it should have only been 15 rounds. And what happened is the telegraphist who took the message, he wrote 15, but with a line through the 1. So they thought it was 75, and they got 60 rounds in. And someone realised the mistake and went and told the captain. And he said, "Well, we've started now, so we might as well finish." And he dropped 75 rounds, and the after effect of that was complete devastation. These pictures, I think, are taken from a visit the ship made later. A few weeks later, a week or so later, they were invited ashore to go and have a look around. I think they toured with one of the divisions, and the reports from 21st Panzer was that they got held up. There was nothing they could do. Guys demoralised them completely. They couldn't leave the village, and it obviously saved lightly armoured brigade 6 airborne was from being overrun.
And it it came up in our tank destroyer week, Si, about what was a tank destroyer, and HMS Rodney came up, and the argument was
Really?
made that it was one of the best tank destroyers of the war, which is,
Yeah.
it kind of undermines that whole what is a tank destroyer, because that's not its primary role, but that's what it was doing with this bombardment. If you destroy tanks, therefore you are a tank destroyer. So
Yeah, no, it's true.
Interesting stuff. And we had a question from Sean just about the use of Royal Marines on the guns. When Royal Marines manned the big guns, did they also do the ranging with ballistic calculations, or was that done by Royal Navy personnel?
No, so they had in fact, there would be a captain up in the spotting tower. There's commanders. The whole turret was Royal Marine from start to finish, and up in the towers, quite often on the battleship, it was actually a Royal Marine officer who was doing the spotting. Not always, but each turret was commanded by a Royal Marine all the way down. So yeah, and there's a part of that. I think the reason it was is because it kind of bonded competition. So it bonded the teams of the towers, and there was also a competition between the front end and the back end, because the guys would compete with each other, the Navy versus the Marines, trying to load quicker, trying to get more accurate shots. I think that's probably why they did it, and it did seem to work. For example, these tanks, I heard another story where when they were looking around and the guys were saying, well, this is obviously X turret that did this. It wasn't the Navy, it must have been a Royal Marine shot. But yeah, just going back to what you were saying about the effect of this as well, I think there's three effects really. There's a strike that actually hits a tank, which obviously is just going to melt it and devastate it.
Yeah.
But bombardment around the tanks will destroy the ground they're on. People can't get away from them, and there's nowhere to hide. And also, maybe ruin the ground around them. The splinters will take out tracks, damage equipment that's on the roofs. Damage optics, all those sort of things. And then, of course, you've got the morale. And they said the Germans commanders were saying the one thing they didn't want to get hit by was a ship. They could hear the whistling of the shells because they're obviously in the air for quite a long time and know they're coming towards them. And people just did not want to move, although they were running away. So you imagine that 1-ton shells coming in at one every 2 minutes. It's pretty devastating.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so let's go ashore now and let's talk about the engineers. So we're now within combined operations, and the Royal Marine Engineers was something that sort of came out because they were as a requirement. When we first had the sort of naval-based protection teams, the NMBDOs, they needed engineers because one of the jobs of the Royal Marines originally was to protect naval bases, but normally when you went overseas, so if they went overseas, they took a base, then the Royal Marines would protect that. They would do anti-aircraft, would do artillery, but they would also clear mines, obstacles, and all that sort of thing. So that's where the engineers really came from. For D-Day, there was two real tasks for them. There was the normal assault engineers. So there was two sections set up. One was drawn into a first Special Service Brigade, about 39 ranks, who landed on the beach H+75. Initially, they were going in to demolish bridges, but because the Germans were either holding bridges or we'd taken bridges, there was no requirement for them. So they basically supported brigade headquarters there. I saw someone on one of your webinars before talking about the CO. I think it might have been Stephen Fisher saying, about the CO's group. Well, you'd normally have a CO's rover group, so he could move around, and he would have a protection team around him. So having 39 spare guys to support that sort of brigade headquarters would probably be pretty useful, and that's why they probably held on to them. And then they had subtasks after that anyway, so that, clearing obstacles, mines, and all that sort of thing. So they would have been very useful, and commando trained. So you're not relying on normal engineers who've got their own job to do. Second two section should have gone in with 4, but I don't know if they were delayed or they just didn't require them and they didn't go until late June. And then they did the same sort of job. They were doing assault engineers jobs. And then you've got the landing craft clearance units. So these units originally were designed to go onto an LCA, go forward with the first wave, or even before the first wave, originally one of the plans, drop into the water, shallow water dive, and clear obstacles and mines so that they clear a path for the landing craft to come through. On D-Day itself, the weather was too bad. There was no way they were ever going to be able to do that and get in the water. They would have just killed them. So they came in a little bit later, but still not far behind the first wave. Some came in with the first wave, around about the first waves. And then really they did a more traditional clearance back. However, they did get in the water. So there was six altogether, two with each sector, each beach, and they were made up of small teams, and actually got some medals. So there was, I've just got a note on this one. There was three distinguished service medals and a military cross. And the military cross was this guy, David Clogger. I can't find, or Cogger, sorry, can't find a picture of him, but someone out there, I'm sure, will have a bit more information on a good picture. So he landed very early on, 7:30 in the morning from his LCA. Got ashore. They got pounded straight away by 88s, machine guns, and mortars, all the rest of it. And of course, a lot of the landing craft, because of the state of the tide, were coming in and getting hit by the mines, in particular, that were on the side of the elements. So he went into the water, and he went into the surf, deep in the water, and he went round and he started putting demolition charges to try and clear them. And he worked for hours in the water with his team and cleared paths in through for the landing craft. It's probably later saved a lot of guys, because when as the tide changed and the water rose, there was a point where obviously that the hedgehogs and all the elements, sea and all that was at the perfect place to get under the hulls. And if they had mines on them as well, you just didn't stand a chance. And obviously 4-8 Commando, for example, had a lot of problems getting in because of the state of tide and because of the obstacles. So yeah, a lot of the guys couldn't get back into the water because they didn't have the right kit, and the beach wasn't. But he did, and he got the military cross for that. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Okay, another interesting thing that we did, which was really unusual, was the Royal Marines Armed Support Group. And this was a really strange thing, because what happened is we had our artillery units, and they thought what we'd do is we'll put some tanks on landing craft, almost like landing craft guns, stick them in the whale deck, chain them down, and we'll fire out over the bows and take out some of the strong points on the way in, which is what the priests did later anyway. And they said, right, because it's Royal Marines, you don't need to drive the tanks, so we'll take the engines out. So the original plan was to have old tanks on the deck and firing over the top. And if you look at the middle slide, you can see the turret. In fact, you can see it on the Sherman as well. They've got white marks, marks all the way around the turret, 0 to 360. This is based on also, a naval turret, because that's what they used to do with the naval turrets. And what it meant was, as a spotter, so if on a landing craft, you could be stood up on the bridge and you could give direction to the tank from outside, and the guy inside has got a similar reticle, and he knows where he's pointing his gun, and that's how you would direct it. So they did an exercise somewhere down in the south, and the story is, I think Montgomery came along and he stood next to one of the tanks, and he said, what's going on? They told him, and he said, well, why don't we keep the engines in and we'll have a useful asset that can go ashore. But the plan was that they would only go ashore as far as the back of the beach, so they could go in, fire in on the landing craft on the way in, then just drive to the back of the beach, take out any strong points, and then they would be abandoned on the beach when they weren't required anymore. So they used Centaurs, with a 75 millimeter petard. 95 millimeter petard. So like a Piat, really, just on a spring, fires a mortar, and it was designed to take out strong points. So they set up originally it was supposed to be Royal Armoured Corps drivers and commanders, and the Marines said, no, we can do this ourselves. So it became all Royal Marines. They went to Bovington, did some training in Bovington, and then they took the tanks off and then went off and did their own training. They waterproofed them, as you can see on the Centaur on the left of the slide. So they put they greased everything up. They put the air intakes on the back, which were taken off when they landed, and then the porpoise sledge on the back carried all their extra ammunition, which they then again binned on the beach, so it could be brought forward when they needed it. They had a Sherman tank, 75mm as a command tank, 4 Centaurs per troop, and then we had 2 full regiments of 80 tanks, 80 Centaurs, sorry, and 20 Shermans, so 8 troops. We had 2 of those, 1st Armoured Support Regiment and 2nd Armoured Support Regiment, and then a 5 independent Royal Marine Support Battery, which was then half the size of that. The reason it's called independent, same as I think probably the reason is 4-1 Commando became an independent commando when they went to Korea, is because then you can switch command and move around independently rather than be under overall command. I think that's correct. So yeah, so they went ashore. They were supposed to be ashore for just a few hours, and they ended up ashore until almost the end of June, and they went all over. So I've got a slide here that just shows where they went to and what they got up to. A couple of tanks were actually lost on the way over, so they were lost just off the Solent, and they've been dived on. I know there's a team in Portsmouth that have dived on those. They're still in quite good nick. And then basically 2nd landed at Juno, 3rd landed at Sword, and 1st landed at Gold. And they went all the way in. They went to Tilly St Mare. They helped out at Hillman. They went all the way down. Were involved briefly with Operation Perch, which was the furthest they went, sort of southwest. But of course, that never sort of did much, did it? I don't really know the full story about what everyone else did there, but I know we went down to support. And then they went over to the Orme Bridgehead. You can see the Sherman on the right there. Again, that's really clear. You can see the numbering, which was good. And the other place where this was useful was with, and I've done it with a tank. So what you normally do is there's a telephone on the back of the tank. I don't know if they do it still with the Challengers, but we definitely had them on the Chieftains. And you could pick the telephone up. And you could talk to the guy in the turret. Say, listen, I've got a target for you. It's a sniper in a roof over there. And you give them a clock ray direction. So okay, it's 1 o'clock and he's up on the top floor, and they would search, find him, and take a shot. So they use that. So again, with the Shermans and with the Centaurs, you could talk to the commander inside the tank, and because of the radials on the outside, the lettering, the numbering, you could actually direct the tank, which was really, really useful. And they used that, 4-8 Commando used that for sure when they were going through Le Grand-sur-Mer. But this is down in the Orme Bridgehead, so this is a bit later. Later on, they went down once they'd finished everything. They supported the 4-8. They then moved down across the bridges, and they went with the rest of the Commandos and looked at the Orme Bridgehead. And this is a really good picture, I think, because I found this in there's a video about it's probably on IWM or YouTube, and it's a movie of six airborne down around the Orme Bridgehead, and I found this, and that's one of the tanks that in a harbour. The guys have got their poncho on the back coming down, and they're sat there making a cup of tea with a glider in the background. So that's pretty good when they thought they were originally just going to have no engines and just sat on the landing craft.
Yeah, and do you think their continued use through June was because they were working well in terms of the interaction with the units as opposed to tech? Because as you said, the Centaur is kind of not bang up to date, but this ability to use the azimuth markings on the turret there and actually direct fire, was it that aspect that was working rather than the tank itself? Does that make sense?
That, but I think also the thing is, you put Royal Marines in any situation and they want to help. Everyone else would have been structured. They would have been under command. They would have been structured. These guys could have just turned up. So, we've got 6 tanks down the road if you want to use them. And the guys would have bought the tanks and said, how can we help? So I think because they were slightly outside that command structure and no one knew who they were and they shouldn't have been there, I think, that probably helped. They would have been looking for the jobs. They would have been saying, we got tanks too, we can do something. So I'm sure that's what they would have done. Yeah. The other interesting thing is when they withdrew, I can't remember what day they withdrew. I've got it written down. They left the tanks behind. So a lot of them were wrecked. So they took them down to places like fords and bridges and ditches, and they turned them upside down and turned them into bridges. Yeah. So yeah, they left them there, and then the guys went back to the UK. I think it was end of June, third full week in June. About half of them re-rolled back into into the Marines, and the others were training up with LVTs and Amtraks because they were looking at the Pacific. So they were going to go off and be amphibious support for the Japanese invasion, which obviously never happened. But yeah, so we kept tanks for about 3 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. Royal Marine Armed Support Group was re-rolled for Afghanistan, so it was reformed using over-snow vehicles, BVs, and amphibious, and they were formed again in Bovington, trained in Bovington, and they deployed. So yeah, they continued until recently.
Brilliant.
Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about really is the landing craft units. So this is really interesting because about a third of all landing craft on D-Day were manned or crewed in one way or another by Royal Marines. And the reason is because the Navy in 1943 were basically running out of people again. And they had a lot of guys tied up in landing craft, minor landing craft. And of course, they probably didn't want to be there. And so they called the Royal Marines in to take over, and they did. So we trained 500 Royal Marine officers and 12,500 Royal Marines as landing craft crew. What I don't know is if that includes the gunners and everyone else that's on board, because obviously a lot of these landing craft gun was crewed by Royal Marines, the guns were crewed by Royal Marines, the landing craft flak and even the landing craft rocket had Royal Marine crews on board. But I'm not sure if they were landing craft guys or they were gunners as well as landing craft guys. And I assume they must be extra because if there's 2,000 guys ashore, the Commandos, 13,000 on landing craft, then we're missing a few thousand. So I assume that the gunners and everyone else is on top. So it's a huge amount of guys that were committed to landing craft. The other thing is that obviously that meant that we were involved in every single beach. So every beach had a Royal Marine presence, one way or another. And I'll talk a little bit about those in a moment. But yeah, most landing craft, minor for sure, had Royal Marines on board. So they did a course, quite a long course. The officers did about 9 weeks. The lads did about 6 or 7 weeks. Then they all came together and did another 5 or 6 weeks together, officers and men. And then they went off and did they got attached their combined operations units, and they did more training. And a lot of them were down on the south coast, or most of them were down the south coast. A lot around Hayling Island, and then up the Solent and that before they deployed out. So one of the landing craft I want to talk about is the landing craft support, which is one that gets overlooked a lot. But we actually had 26, was it? Yeah, 26 of these. Originally, they were commanded by naval personnel, driven and the stokers were all Navy, and the gun crew was Marines. And then eventually we took them over completely. So these were all Royal Marine crews, and they were basically tasked to escort the LCAs in. So if each mothership had about 15, 16 LCAs, you had 2 of these. And the idea was they would help form up the waves, and then they would go in with the waves, and they would give close fire support. So they had a crew of 11. They had an officer, which was generally a lieutenant Royal Marines, corporal on. I'm going to read these out. Corporal twin Lewis's machine guns, which is in the turret, which is called a Bolton turret. A coxswain, stoker, a Marine who had the smoke layer. So this was the machine, which was a chemical machine. Marine gun loader for the main guns, signaller, Marine, and then 2 mortarmen. They could fire shells, HE shells and smoke ashore. And then you had 2 Lewis gunners as well, which were on the bows. So it's an 11-man crew. And in many cases, they went all the way in. So 2 beaches in particular, 2 stories. One was Point de Hoc. So it was actually Royal Navy crews, I think, that were driving the LCVPs, because they were VPs off there, I think mostly a few LCAs, into Point de Hoc. Oh, no, sorry, I think they were LCAs, into Point de Hoc. Yep. And it was was two LCSMs that supported them, and I think both of them actually were lost in Walcheren. I don't know if it was the same cruise, but I think both of them were lost in Walcheren with T4s. But they were pretty good, pretty formidable thing. And interesting enough, when just before I left the Marines, we were looking at options for close support craft again because we needed them, and we talked about having smoke, having heavy machine guns to support us, and we did end up with gunboats, which we've still got to today, because you need a command boat, you need something that isn't involved in landing, can stand back, look around, see what's going on, and also can be involved in supporting holding the waves together, making sure they're on time, making sure they're in formation, that sort of thing. And that's what the job of this boat was. On Gold Beach, was it Gold? Let's just have a look. So there's a good story by a guy called Lofty Whitting. He was in 524 LCA flotilla. If I get it wrong, I know Stephen Fish will pick me up. Hang on. It was Gold, yeah. So he tells a story about going in with the wave. They picked up the Hampshires and they were going in, and he said they got hit on the way in. 88s going left and right, mortars started, and he said the boss got up onto the turret and was on the side of the turret, and he was giving orders from the side of the turret. And an 88 shell came down and just landed just off their sort of port bow, and the officer said, thinking that no two shells ever fall in the same place, shouted at the coxswain, "Go to port, go to port." Anyway, he didn't hear it, or he ignored him and carried straight on. And the next shell landed exactly where the other shell had gone. So the Lofty's on the front end and saw this and went, "Oh, good job we didn't change direction, because it would have gone straight through the middle of the boat."
Wow.
Anyway, they followed the Hampshires all the way in, fired ashore, put down Lewis machine gun until the boys were on the beach and could take over, and then they pulled back. So it was actually a very useful piece of kit. I think the other good thing about them are, you've got smoke. Smoke's a double-edged sword. You've got to be very careful with it. But if you're making smoke, you're making noise, you probably attracted a lot of the fire away from the guys in the boats. And those 35 guys in the boat are much more important to get ashore than than one boat giving support. So I'm sure they did a really good job. This is a nice story here. I'm just going to talk briefly about the LCA and the LCVP. I should have put an LCVP up, but there's, if you search landing craft, what do you get? You get LCVPs. Everyone thinks a Higgins boat is, what won the war. And really, it was the LCA. There was a lot more LCAs. In fact, I've got the figures. There was about 502 LCAs in the sort of initial waves, 189 LCVPs, Higgins boats. And then Navy list mentions another 650 LCVPs later, but I guess they must be follow-up and reserve. I'm not 100% sure on the figures, but there was definitely a lot more LCAs than LCVPs. And they were really the workhorse of spearhead of getting everyone ashore, not the workhorse of spearhead of getting everyone ashore. George Tandy is really interesting. I put this story up about 2 years ago, and his son contacted me and said, "See, you're talking about my dad, thanks very much." And he told me a few stories about him, which were quite interesting. Nice guy. But basically, he was on the way in. Rudder, he was the coxswain, and the rudder went. And he got in the water and steered with his feet all the way into the beach, and then all the way back out again, and got the DSM for that. Yeah, pretty brave guy. He said his feet were hanging out because obviously it was so cold. He had his feet in the water for 30 minutes or whatever. As they were going in, and so he stayed on the back and steered the whole thing in and back out with his feet. So pretty
good old War Marine improvisation, finding a solution, adaptability.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I don't know how he got off the beach. I mean, it must have been a pretty difficult maneuver to get back off, especially with surf rolling in or water coming in. But yeah, he did a good job. And there's a really good. I've got a dit of him and something his son put up on the website if anyone's interested in looking a bit deeper. Okay, so that's those sort of units, and now we just briefly talk about 30. So 30 assault unit, it's been reformed recently. Actually, it's part of 3 Commando Brigade again, and their initial job was really to collect intelligence. They started out. It was what's his name? Guy that wrote James Bond, Ian Fleming. Yep. So it was Ian Fleming that they came up with the idea. The Germans had a version and they'd used it successfully, and we knew about it. And I think the reason it was called 30 was because it was his secretary's door number. I think he was 32 or something like that, and his secretary's door number. So they set up 30. Originally, it was RAF, Army, and Navy personnel. Later on, really, it sort of got taken over by the Navy and the Marines. So each unit would be a couple of naval officers, because you needed them for some of the intelligence, because you needed those to gather intelligence from naval bases or naval equipment. And then you had other officers who probably were trained in whatever they needed to look for. And then you had a Royal Marines troop that would then protect them and look after them. And they got pretty much everywhere. So they landed at Utah. They landed in both the other beaches at different times. And they were looking for V1 initially, sites. And one of the most famous things they did was the Cherbourg naval headquarters, where they got in with the Americans. I think it was 9th Infantry, took Cherbourg. They went in with them. There's a really good video that shows 9th. It is 9th, isn't it? I think.
I think so. Yeah.
Anyway, so there's a really good video of 9th, and in there you can see 30. I've got some stills from that. In fact, the still in the middle at the top is them going into the villa in Cherbourg, and that's from that film. So yeah, here they are. There was three forces, 3 groups named after the commanders: Wool Force, Kurt Force, and Pike Force. Pike Force landed on the 6th, and they were supposed to go in and capture Douvres radar station, which was done eventually by 4-1 Commando on 17th, I think it was, of June. We'll go over that in a minute. But that was the original plan, to try and get in there, get Enigma, get the radar equipment, and get some information and intelligence on the radar. The radar was pretty much destroyed anyway by the naval bombardment. So they probably wouldn't have got much out of it. But anyway, they couldn't do it because the Canadians didn't take Douvres. So they were like holding back, looking for other tasks. Kurt Force followed them up, and they were bringing the vehicles. I think man for man, 30AU had more vehicles than any other unit, apart from probably the SAS on that, because they had to be mobile, and they had to be quick, and also they had to have large enough vehicles to be able to gather equipment and bring it back. So they were pretty mobile. So that was the equipment coming behind, which obviously couldn't be in the first loads because it would have taken up valuable space. So I imagine that's why it's there a couple of days, or a day later. And then Wool Force. So Wool Force went in with Utah, the Americans, and they were initially to look for V1 crossbow sites, and then they went into Kriegsmarine headquarters in Cherbourg, which was a follow-on task. I'm not sure if that was an original task or if that was just once they knew they were going in. But yeah, what they actually got hit by butterfly mines. I forgot a thing on it now. They went into from Utah. They went into a site overnight, just a harbour position in a field, and they got hit by butterfly mines, and a few of the guys got wounded. A couple got killed, which was really unfortunate. But then they went off looking for V1s, and they found a couple of sites, which was obviously useful. And then they did the raid on the headquarters, where they took quite a few prisoners, a couple hundred prisoners, I think it was. And they also got a lot of information from the basement, a lot of papers and encryption, crypto and that. So it's really, really useful task. So, okay, so that's really the sort of that side of things. I'm going to go on to Royal Marines now, Commandos. So it's very, very difficult. I like what Stephen Fisher's done. He's been able to sit down and pin every single location. I've tried that, and I've got a few. I haven't had time to pin them all and make a story behind each one, but I'm going to eventually. It's a very, very difficult thing to do. What happened with the Royal Marines and why we became Commandos was we almost got left behind. So traditionally, it was our bread and butter. Traditionally, we had battalions that we raised in the Second World War, and their job was to do amphibious landings, to take beaches, take beachheads, and move inshore. We went down and we did Madagascar. which we commanded, but actually become more of a naval and army combined operation, which is really the start of these sort of, Norway, and that was really the start of the combined operations. And there was a danger that, because we had a lot of officers who said, look, we've been doing this for 250, 300 years by then. We're not taking orders from the army. If they want to go and do commandos, they can do it. But we do this anyway. So what do we need? And actually, luckily there was a few officers who said, no, we've got plenty of guys that want to volunteer and want to become commandos. It's something we should do. Later on, it was Mountbatten really that made sure that we did it. The first two commandos to get set up were 40 Commando, which was A Commando, which was all volunteers. And then after that was 41, which was B Commando initially. 40 got involved in Dieppe. So there was a lot of lessons learned in Dieppe. And we also trained the Rangers up. I think it was 50 Rangers that joined 40 Commando for that. And so a lot of lessons were learned. So we knew it was a job we could do. We already had commandos now. And it was really Mountbatten that convinced the senior officers that, look, you need to come in and be part of this. And that's why really we started to form the commando units. Some were volunteers, but mostly what happened is they would form them up from the battalions, and then they would basically select them. So they'd go through, the medical officer would go through and check everyone. They'd do a swim test. They would have an interview, and they would select the guys that they thought would go forward and want to go forward, and the volunteers. If you didn't volunteer and you were fit enough and you looked like you could do the job, you were in. So it was kind of, arm behind your back kind of thing for a few guys. But they were initially, guys didn't really want the berry. They wanted to keep their own berry. They weren't sure about the green berry. And there was even guys saying, it's a putrid color and things like that. And then eventually guys started to realize the esprit de corps that went with it, matched the Royal Marine sort of ethos. And that's kind of why really the guys got behind it. And really why, when you landed on D-Day, I mean, everyone says love it, said, leave your helmets behind. Guys were throwing helmets over the wall, over the side, because they didn't want that. They wanted to be next to a guy who had a green beret on, the same as them. They trained next to, and they would know, would look after them. And that's what it's all about. I've got mine here.
Yeah, cool. I think it's worth reminding ourselves, Si, that you said it yourself, that the Royal Marines Commandos always had its origins in that amphibious assault, getting off of boats part, whereas the Army Commandos, their early history in World War II kind of gets tied up with the airborne and what became the SAS and the small-scale raiding force, because they were all kind of bubbled up into one kind of concentration. And then as the war went on, they kind of specialized in we'll be the ones who jump out of planes, you'll be the ones who get off this. But the Royal Marine Commandos, as you said, it was always the beginning. It was the by boat aspect and it said, hence the swim test. Whereas the Army Commandos, you could be an Army Commando and serve throughout the war without ever having done an amphibious landing as a commander. Yeah. You could theoretically do that. Yeah,
no, exactly. Yeah. And also the other thing was that probably in the early planning, there was no requirement for commandos in the early planning, I don't think. I think when they first did combined ops and they planned D-Day and they started talking about D-Day, they were just assuming that it would be, Army going ashore, forming a beachhead, moving in. And any commando stuff would be raids behind the lines, would be, paratroop infiltration and that sort of thing. And it wasn't until later, and that's why 48 Commando was formed a little bit later on, that they talked about the flanks, is once you take the beach, what happens if you counterattack from the flanks? And I think probably that came out of the planning when they knew about the Atlantic Wall. Because before the Atlantic Wall, you're just fighting a beachhead and you're pushing people back. But if you push in and you've still got flanks that are insecure, which I think comes from having strong points rather than just having a mobile military. I think that's probably, I don't know, but I think that's probably why they realized that the flanks needed guarding. And who could do that? Well, you don't need a soldier, you want a commando, because they're light. They're not going to be ashore very long. They're going to be ashore for 12, 24 hours. They're going to be reactive. They're going to be able to move quickly. They can move in small teams if they need to, or form up. And they're going to protect your flanks as you bring in all your equipment and push that enemy back. And I think that's probably why it became an amphibious commando role on D-Day rather than anything else. And in fact, that's why 48 Commando was formed, because to protect the flanks, they realized they increased the amount of beaches and they considered the flanks, they thought, actually, we've got a flank that hasn't got any protection. So 4/8 Commando, which we'll talk about in a minute, wasn't formed until March 1944. So so they had 3 months or less to get ready to take part in D-Day. So it shows the caliber of the guys, and actually, you know, where they already were. All they needed then really was the commando training. Although they did say, I think it was 4/8 Commando, I think it was the adjutant said, when they were about 2 or 3 days in, he said, you know, we're only on page 34 of the manual here. We haven't got any further yet. We're still learning. So, yeah, so they had a lot to learn, but, you know, yeah, I think that just shows, you know, the caliber of the guys, and that's also their mindset where they already were.
Yeah.
So yeah, so involved in D-Day were 5 commando units. 4/5 Commando, my old unit, came under 1st Special Service Brigade, and then the other 4, 4/1, 4/6, 4/7, 4/8, all came under 4th. 4/6 initially should have gone in and done a cliff assault, actually, somewhere in Oostrum.
Yeah.
But they then became the floating reserve because they didn't need them, so they kept them ashore, kept them afloat for D-Day, and they ended up landing on the 7th. They were called forward on the 7th for another task, so they did end up landing. But I'll go through the beaches in a minute and each commando unit and what they did. Here is a generic all-back. Now, this is another problem. People will tell you exactly what a commando unit looked like. They were all slightly different. It depended on the Army commandos. I think were probably all the same. The Royal Marine Commandos were all slightly different. This is based roughly on 4/7 Commando, but only roughly. And this is roughly what it looked like. It was 5 fighting troops, which were really company size, what we call companies now, and a heavy weapons troop. And of course, above that, you had a command element, HQ troop, and the commando headquarters. Each one of those fighting troops had a headquarters element, which is the officer, the sergeant major, and mortar team, heavy weapons team, and then you had the sections. You had 2 sections with headquarters, and then 2 subsections, 10 or 11 guys, depending. For this one, 4/7, this is how they broke it down. They had a control group, which is a Marine or a sergeant and a Marine runner. And then you had a Bren group and then 2 assault groups. And the reason is because when you attack a position, you use your Bren gun to put fire down or to flank. And then you go up the middle, or you put fire down and you flank round and go around the side. And so you can maneuver them around an assault. You have 2 assault groups, one to back the other up. So one to take trench 1, one to take trench 2, or to support each other. One of the biggest problems with the format of this is they actually landed on the beaches. 2 or 3 units were down 25 to 50% from casualties on the beach. So straight away you're breaking down who's left, and that's very difficult to recover in smaller units. Everyone can do each other's job, but actually regrouping is difficult when you've got big tasks. And a lot of the big tasks, like the strong points and things, they needed a whole unit, really, a whole commando unit, you know, strength to be able to take them out. And that's why they struggled a lot in the early days to actually get success. So here's the 5 units and where they landed. 4/7 on Gold, 4/8 on Juno, and 4/6 again on Juno, but the next day. And then on Sword, we had 4/1 and 4/5. 4/1 Commando, so they actually formed up in 1942, Pembroke Dock. They were the most experienced commando on D-Day out of all of them because they'd already done Sicily and Solano. They've already had battle experience. And they landed on Sword Beach, and they went straight into strong point at Lyon-sur-Mer. And then later on, they went on to capture the radar station at Douvres, and then they went into their own defensive perimeter. The commando units were only supposed to be in for 24 hours, something like that, and most of them did, you know, what was it, like 80 days nearly, wasn't it? 84 days, something like that, before a lot of them got pulled out. And some didn't get pulled out, some carried on then, and were involved in the rush to the Seine, and obviously up through to Walcheren on that. So just some pins on 4/1. Luke Samare really was the big one for 4-1 initially. Just to check.
This is amazing stuff, by the way, so we're loving it.
Really? Oh, good. Okay, thank you, mate. Yeah, so they got tied down. In fact, I don't know where my. I'm sorry. They got tied down initially. It's the strong points there. So they had a bit of a struggle. So they were supposed to land at, I think it was 27. It was I've lost the note that went with it. So I think it was WN27 that hit them on the way in. And then they turned down the beach and they come to left to the east, and then they went on to 26. And 26, let's see if I've got it here. No, this is loose. 26 was where 4-8 had their big battle, and I think then what they did is, and I'm sorry, mate, I've lost the notes. They then withdrew back. Let me put them in order. No. Okay. They then withdrew back, and then got stuck in the dunes for a couple of days before they moved on again. But their big success really was 4-1. Was Douvres radar station. So this was later in the month. So the Canadians had tried it. One of the other commando units had moved up that way, and we'll cover those in a minute, and come across it, and it was just too strong. It was really well fortified. It was huge. It was two parts. It was a northern part and a southern part, and they really struggled. It wasn't until later on when 4-1 came up that they were able then to plan properly and take it out. What they decided to do, they were over to the east in a woodland. What they decided to do was doing a probing attack on the northern area first, which is a smaller bunker complex, and probe it and see what happened. So they went in on the 13th in the middle of the night, 01 in the morning. A troop under Lieutenant Stevens. They had the Royal Engineers help get them through the wire. And then what they did is they had 6 Averies, which would push forward, go through the mines, go through the wire, and then they would push in. And they were told if you get hit, get beaten back, just withdraw. It's a probing attack. Don't go through. You're not big enough. Just see what's there. If they don't hit back, take prisoners, take the place over. But if they do, anyway, they did. They had a 15-minute firefight. No one opened up until they were really in close. They thought they got it, and so they withdrew back. No casualties, and were able then to say, okay, yeah, this place is going to be defended and fortified. So we need to replan. Anyway, it took a couple of days then of replanning and a change of CO. The new CO came in actually. I think it was the day before, and then they attacked again. So what they did this time is there was a small attack again by a troop attacked the northern at the same time, northern area at the same time, but the main attack was on the southern area. So they came in from the east. They had a barrage for 30 minutes from naval gunfire support, smashing the area. Although they said when they got in, there wasn't that much damage to the bunkers because the bunkers were so well built. They used flails, three teams of flails that opened up 3 lanes basically through the minefields and through the wire, so the troops could come through. Then the Averies came in behind, opened up, and then they would fire then onto any of the close bunkers. Any that they couldn't take out, they were supposed to put demolition charges on. And then just behind that was 3 troops of 4-1 Commando, BP and X-ray, Papa and Bravo, would come through then and clear through. The Germans were so demoralised by the amount of fire that had hit them and the guys coming in behind the tanks that they basically surrendered. There was only a couple of small firefights. There was only 1 casualty from 4-1, and they took over 200 prisoners, and they took the radar station. So it was very successful. 44 tanks involved, but it was a really good sort of combined arms effort: engineers, tanks, artillery, and naval artillery, and the commandos. So it's a very, very good sort of lesson on how to take a fortified position.
And also a lesson of
troops.
In the preparation and planning side is that rather like Hillman, the Allies had kind of just identified Douvres as being a radar station, but hadn't really acknowledged how big it was as a defensive position in its own right. The same with Hillman. It's not just a command position. It had all these interlocking, trenches and tunnels and underground bunkers. And you get to the side of Douvres, you get into Tyville, the fortified chateau there. You get these other artillery units in hedgelines and woods and copses and things. And it's, though the Allied information about what the Germans had built was really, on the whole, pretty good, they had kind of misjudged some of the strengths of these inland positions, hence why it became such a tough nut to crack. And now if you go to Douvres, it's just really a radar museum. It's cool, but because all the trenches and the foxholes and things are filled in, the minefields are gone, it's harder to kind of grasp. Your graphic shows it well, just what an incredible defensive position. I mean, think, folks, if you're watching this, think something in terms of like Pointy Hock, in terms of defensive ability, to Brooks and foxholes and trenches and barbed wire and stuff. So yeah, it was one of the cases where the Allies kind of got it a bit wrong in advance.
Yeah, I think the other thing is as well, I mean, I've not been there, but, looking at it, you can see all the way down to the beach, can't you? It is a commanding position. Because it was a radar station, it had really good lines of communication.
Yeah.
So they had, I think they had landline as well as, radio. So they were able from that position to be able to, command what was going on, give information, bring in probably artillery, mortars, observe what we were doing down in the bottom. So
that's a really good point there, because the Widerstandsnest along the beaches, you can't even visually see the next Widerstandsnest 500 meters to your left or right because of the urban environment and buildings. And but when you get to that position, sort of 3, 4, 5 miles inland on that high ground there with the open fields, they're all kind of connected by line of sight. Then, as you say, you add the radios, add the telephone lines, add everything else, and it was a much more mutually supporting defensive position. Even though, days after day, the Germans are losing these positions and have lost a lot of them, they've still got this ability to kind of draw on these other positions there left and right. And then you add in the fact that the Germans are forming these kind of hedgehog positions, these Kampen groups and stuff from D-Day and 21st Panzer, and this. It's the story of the next few days of the Normandy assault, is that the misjudging of how stubbornly defended these inland positions would be. So and
you can only go around these places.
Great rabbit hole on that, but
well, you can see. I mean, that's an Avray on its side there, which is, I guess, has been hit by a 75 centimeter cannon. So that that's pretty formidable. You've got to get rid of that. Okay, no, so that was 4-1 Commando.
Yep.
Okay, so the next unit, 4-5, they had seen action in Dakar, Op Menace, in 1940 when they were 5th Battalion, and then they formed up in August 1943, Burley, New Forest, and they were attached to 3rd Division for Sword Beach. And they pushed south and east across the Orme River and Canal. Again, this is another one. This gets, like you said about Pegasus Bridge earlier, this just gets tied up in Pegasus Bridge. Any pictures you see of guys taking that route, which was 6 Commando, I think, 4-5 Commando are just dragged into that. 4-5 Commando did go across the bridge. They did get sniped at. They lost someone on the bridge, but their mission was really to get forward and get into Salnez and hopefully Merville, where the battery was. That was their real task, to get in and take that area before anyone else did, and try and protect that eastern flank. So they really went further. They got into a bit of hot water because, in fact, here's the map of them landing, and then all the way through. It says link up with the paras at Pegasus Bridge. I mean, we probably shook their hands, said hello. I've got a couple of para mates now who I think are watching this. And then across, had a laugh probably, had a couple of pictures taken, and then we moved east and north. The first thing that we were supposed to have done is take Franceville-le-Poge. They got in, there was a big, I think it was WN06, I think it is. which was pretty much on the beach. I might be wrong, but it's a strong point on the beach, and it's kind of the top of where the road is now.
Yeah.
So they moved down towards that, thinking they were going to take it. Moved down towards the beach, came in from the east, had a look at it, and got hit quite badly. Had to withdraw. Rethought the plan, tried again. There's no way they were going to take it. So they withdrew then to Merville. And the story is actually when they got into Merville, they were just going to hold Merville for now. That was sort of the backup plan. They went to the south of the village and got hit again. And withdrew again into the village and realised that was the back end of or the top end of Merville Battery, which the Paras had taken and should have been clear, but actually the Germans had moved back into. So then there is a story about then trying to take that battery back again, which happens a bit later on. It's attempted a couple of times, but it's another strong point like Douvres radar station. It's going to take a lot more than just a few commandos with light equipment to take it out.
And it's no wonder they came under fire when they went down to the Merville Frontsfield right on the beach deck. That's one of the places I take my tour groups to in October, because you've got a pretty enormous set of bunkers there. It was, I think, the RAF dropped about 150 Lancasters attacked that over the course of the 5th and 6th of June. But you're exposed to the high ground over to the kind of the southeast. The Germans have got those positions off towards eventually Carbourg and Deauville, and so you move down that flat bit down there. There's marsh and floods there as well. You've got bunkers everywhere. You've got an all-round defense there, and those Germans haven't really been as affected quite as much by the naval bombardments on D-Day. Yeah, the Lancasters have hit them, but that didn't do that much damage.
No.
So, and that is, I want to remind how that is a long way from Saw Beach. You've gone several miles inland over the canal and the river, and then all the way up there. You're up to about, I don't know what that is, 14, 15 miles or something by that point.
Yeah, I reckon it must be. Yeah, I think it was at 7 or 9 to the bridges. I think.
That's a fair old schlep to go. Yeah.
Well, the other interesting thing is when they got ashore. I'm really sorry, I got my notes on the other computer. It's not working. When they got ashore, they got hit coming ashore. When they got ashore, they obviously had boats with them in case the bridges were blown and bicycles. But the roads were too bad to use the bikes, and they couldn't ditch the boats. So one of the guys, I listened to his audio on IWN, and he said, I carried a bike, which was reasonably heavy. I was wet, and I carried a boat on my back all the way to the bridges until they got told you don't need the boats anymore because the bridges are taken. So they got mortared they got mortared somewhere in the dunes on the way in. But there's a lot of the areas were flooded, obviously, behind the beaches, as you know. But of course, same as you said about the Lancasters dropping all those bombs, because it's flooded areas, mortars just sink in and don't really cause any damage. And that was, luckily, it was counterproductive because the guys could form up behind the beaches once they got over. And the same with, like you said, that area down there. I mean, I've only seen it I've got some other pins where I was trying to look into later on. I think it's 4-5 again. They go down and they do attack all that area. It might be one of the other units, or it might be 2 units. They take all that area back. There's a windmill somewhere down there, and that overlooks the whole area as well. And it's very difficult. It's almost like they did in Walcheren. They were going through dunes, they were going through marsh and bog and everything to try and take these strong points. Very, very difficult thing to do.
Yeah, and that worth reminding ourselves that Salonel, wasn't eventually liberated till early August. I mean, the front just didn't move there. Those pushes right up there on June the 6th by the Commandos were ultimately unsuccessful. But we must remind ourselves the Allies didn't go back there for another 2 months. It's amazing. You're right near the Wiestram. Those bases liberated June the 6th. You travel a few miles east, and it's August. And then
we'll cover it in a minute. But these units dug in there for, I don't know how long, 50, 60 days, something like that, before they could move forward again. It was a long time, and they were in the same position. All they were doing was fighting patrols. I've got a couple of examples in a minute. They were doing fighting patrols and probing to try and bring the enemy on, and they just kept counterattacking each other. So they were there a very long time. This guy is quite interesting. There's a good story on it's on the website. He jumped with the Paris. So he was a liaison officer. He had a Marine with him as his MOA, Marine Officer Attendant, Batman, and Signaller. And they were supposed to drop with the Paris and then link up with 4-5 Commando. He was obviously 4-5 Commando. It was his birthday, the day he jumped. I think it was his 20th birthday. And they got, I think they were like 17 miles off from where they should have dropped. And he ended up doing an escape and evasion. Oh, hang on, sorry. And basically ended up down in Bordeaux. So on the 4th of August. So 2 months later, and he went all the way across through Le Mans, down through Poitiers and all that, with the Marquis, helping them at times, and then ended up getting back down. He got captured by the Gestapo at one point, faked an injury, I think, or an illness, got into hospital, escaped from the hospital. The usual sort of story of these guys, and then made it back. He then joined 4-5 Commando again, rejoined the unit, and was involved in the area of the Biche Bosch when they moved in through Holland. He was actually killed on a place called Belle Isle, which we named Belle Isle. It's a Royal Marine memorable date from the old days. In the Biche Bosch, doing a patrol, got pinned down and killed. Unfortunately, I think he was 20.
What a story! But
yeah, he's got a really interesting story. Too long to go into now, but yeah, really cool with his Batman. But you can't find a picture of Marine Donald. Someone out there maybe has his story, maybe is has, because we know his name, but there's no story about him or what he did. So 4-6 Commando, they formed up in Dorset, Piddle Hinton near Dorchester, and originally, like I said, they were supposed to do a cliff assault on the left side of the Orne estuary and destroyed a battery there. What actually happened is that they were put into reserve. There was no requirement for that cliff assault. They would have been out on a flank on their own anyway. So I think they were probably held back. Everything was going pretty well. And I guess Naval Gunfire Support maybe had done its job. And so that they then brought in on the next day. They went into Douvres again, and they were supposed to support, I believe, the Canadians, who were originally going to take the radar station, which was cancelled at the last minute. And then they went on to attack the Hamel and Rots, again under the Canadians. And that was a really interesting story because they... Oh, here we go. This is it. So they moved into a defensive position, and then they had an O group the day before the attack, and there was basically a 4-phase attack to go down the valley and take. It was 4 different objectives with the Canadians. The first 2 objectives weren't required. The Canadians just pushed through, and then they went into the Hamel and Rots and took the Hamel and Rots with the Canadians. Took a huge amount of prisoners. Big success. And secured that whole area. And
worth mentioning, folks, if we've got 5 places on our World War II TV tour in October, and we go to that area where the Commandos fought, we go to a broken section of the stone wall in the village there where Jimmy Whittaker met his end there, and it's an amazing story. There's I've lost sight there. Where there were German half tracks, there were Panthers, there was all sorts of stuff there. It's an amazing story, and yeah, contact me via my D-Day story and website or via social media, and I will let you know how to join up that October tour. But for some reason, we just lost Cy there for a second. He'll come back again, I'm sure, in a minute. I'm really enjoying this one. He's back now. That's good. So I thought I had to do it on my own there for a moment, Cy, but you fell away.
Yeah, sorry, do I need to? I guess I need to reload.
So double click the slides again, and then we'll bring it up again. Yep.
Okay,
yep.
Great, thanks.
And where were we? We were on something like.
Yeah, I must apologise.
There we are. A Royal Marine, they're never happy unless they're carrying a big weight on their backs. It's a brilliant, fantastic presentation, this, and I'm really enjoying it. And there's so much stuff that I think I didn't know about the Royal Marines on D-Day, so I'm really glad we're doing this. So, yeah, back to you then.
Thanks very much. Okay, great. So 4-6. So the attack on Rots, Hammer on Rots, that was a big success. Really good, sort of infantry role task. I think a Royal Marine Armed Support Group got involved as well, and so it was a good thing for us, and also working with the Canadians. And the good thing about working with the Canadians, I think, is actually they've got a lot of history, so it's really good to look at their history, because they mentioned the Corps in there. It's very easy to pick up stuff that it's very difficult to find in Army history when we get involved with them. I'm just seeing if I can get my notes. So then they obviously went down to the Orme bridgehead again, 19th of June. And they were there again until August. But what I want to do, if it's going to work, there we go. I thought I'd lost it. So that's the phases. That was the 4 phases of the original plan. They gave orders the night before, and basically got on with it. And they ended up attacking the Hammer on Rots. So this is, I'm just going to see if this is going to work. So this was a recce patrol. So this is later. This is actually July. But I thought it's a good example. It's taken from their war diary of the sort of operation that was then happening down in the Orme bridgehead. There's a really good story. I think it was 4 or 5 Commando. There's 2 quite famous snipers who spent some time down in this area. It's a place called the Grande Farm. I'll look it up now because you'll know where it is. There's a farm that they used to use a lot. 4 or 5 Commando used to use a lot as a forward operating base. And patrol forward from. And there was 2 snipers, and they used to spend a lot of time out there. And there's one story where the snipers are out back to back. They've worked together a lot. And a runner comes up the road shouting their names. Where are you? Where are you? And they're like, bloody hell, we're in a sniper position. So one of the lads stands up and says, yeah, we're over here. What are you doing? He said, they're going to bring in naval gunfire support. Get out the area. So the area had been targeted by the Navy. And so they did a runner and got out just as the rounds were about to come in. But this is the same area, so the lads spent a lot of time down here. This is 4-6, and this is a typical patrol. So this is exactly as things are done today, really. So why are you going to do it? In this case, is there a wire forward of the enemy forward defence lines? Maybe because we want to do an attack, or we want to move through the area, or we want to find a weakness, a weak point where we can go in. If so, what type of wire thickness? Is it a Bangalore task? Distance of obstacle from line to forward defence line. Are there any indication of mines, wires, or anything like that to the forward or the rear? And what's the best route for a raiding party if we want to go and hit it? So a small team couples together. This will be, in this case, it's an officer and a section, and he goes in. This isn't working, I'm afraid. But anyway, so I think we can follow the red line instead. I put a little plot on there, but it's not working. So they start at the bridge. It's about 8 o'clock at night because they want to start with some slight daylight. Of course, Second World War, there's no night vision equipment. So everything's done on binoculars and using light, backlight. So they move up the track and then they go east. And where you see the LMG position, basically they drop off the LMG group, which is 2 guys, number 1 and number 2, which is kind of in the center. Does my pointer work?
No, you can't. Just have to describe, I'm afraid.
Yeah, okay, no worries. Drop off the LMG to cover them. So that's looking now to the right, to the east. And then they move up into that field and across, and they stop again. This time, there's some bomb craters down to the southeast, you can see. They leave then 2 guys behind, riflemen, and say, right, okay, cover the south and the east for us, and then we move forward. Then the officer and the sergeant, in this case, then go up north, turn right, and then they move into, which is a small copse, a little orchard. From there, they can hear enemy, so they know they're in the right area. So the first thing they do is there's loads of new saplings that have been in the copse. So they feel up and down, they check around, they dig around to see if there's any wires, any mines. There's nothing. They move forward into the copse around to the right, and then they lay there for half an hour to an hour listening and watching. To the northeast, where you can see enemy MG written, someone lights up a cigarette, and they light up the whole area. So suddenly they can see everything. They can see the machine gunner with an MG42, and they can see he's on a fixed line going that way. They can see the wire, which is, you can see to the right, to the east. and they can see that it's low. It's a couple of inches off the deck. They can see it's a bit rusty, and so they've got a lot of information already. Once things are settled, they then move off, probably still while he's smoking, because he's probably ruined his night vision. And then they move back out. They go around. They pick up the two guys they've left behind. They're watching the craters. They move back down to the LMG gunners, and they pick up the LMG gunners. And just as they are moving off, they hear someone coming up the track. So someone's coming up towards them. So they go to ground, and they call out the challenge in English. Nothing. So these guys keep coming. They call it out again in German. They keep coming. So they open up on them with SMGs, with Thompson machine guns. LMG stood by just in case they need it. Anyway, it all goes quiet. Something goes into the hedge as if it's going to run away, and then goes quiet. Anyway, what they've done is killed a cow. So when they go forward to investigate, there's a cow coming up the road.
In fairness, it didn't know the password, so it was, it was his own fault.
Yeah, moo it was. So then they come left and around the corner, and as they're coming back down to finish a patrol, they can smell something. Go out to investigate, and it's a dead German that's been there for some time, and then they come back in, and so from that they can then write their patrol report. So they've got the information now that they need. So this is kind of a typical sort of mission or task that would have been going on while the guys were dug in down in this area. They weren't just sat still waiting. The Germans were still trying quite a lot to push them back in the early days, and so they were counterattacking a lot. There was a lot of sniping going on. There was a lot of small sort of missions going on. Especially, you've seen the area down there. Well, you know it on the ground. I don't know it that well, but there's a little bit of bocage. There's quite a few fields. There's probably smaller fields than there are today when you look on Google Earth, because they were smaller fields. So there's a lot of hedgerows and ditches and things that they could get around. And also, interestingly, I've seen this in a couple of reports, that they used to milk the cows. So when they were out on patrol, the cows would follow them. And I've had this happen to me, where about 4 or 5 cows start following you, and it's an absolute nightmare. And what I wish I'd known this. And what they were doing was milking them, because then they'd be happy and they'd move on again and they'd stop moving. So 4-7 were formed in Dorchester. They launched from 2 ships, Princess Josephine and Victoria, 420 men. They had an absolute nightmare, 4-7 Commando, coming in. And the reason was that the beach should have been cleared, because the commanders weren't really there they weren't there to land and take positions. They were there to cover flanks where positions had already been taken, and they got absolutely hit on the beach. Massive casualties. But their main mission was Port Elbasan, which is now famous. No one knew about this really until more recently. It's become a really big thing, and a lot of that is down to the guys that do the walk every year, and that's just grown and grown and grown. I think it's amazing, and I did have the plot on the other side. I did have the plot of where they go, because it's really interesting, and there's a lot of things that happen on the way. Well, the first thing, of course, is that they land at 12:15. And there's only 256 men left on the beach in any fit state to go forward and do a task, which is a commando task. And the commando task is Port Elbasan. And the idea is that this is the boundary between the British sector and the American sector. And this is where Pluto, the initial Pluto, is going to come in. The other Pluto, I can't remember where the other Pluto was going in, but it took a long time to get in. So for a very long time, this was the only place actually that could supply fuel from the UK via the Pluto line. So it's a good job they took it. There was 4 strong points in Port Elbasan. Port Elbasan is and there's some pictures in a minute. It's on a really steep cliff. Looks down. It's almost like a Cornish village. Looks down into this harbour, and the only way to take it really was from behind. They started out at 1200 from the back of the beach. Had a RV and moved off. They moved through. You can see here 1430 Le Bleu Hot. They were sniped at and they had to get through minefields on the first phase of that journey. And then again, as they went across to the west, they had problems the whole way. You know, every now and again, there was concentrations of Germans that they had to, and there was, I don't think, the problem was, I think, was there was no way around this. You know, when you look at 6th Commando going down to the bridges, they were able to, because they had a huge expanse to go through, they were able to maneuver their way down to avoid anywhere where there might have been defensive positions. There wasn't any, I don't think, real defensive positions. There wasn't any strong points here, but there was plenty of concentration of troops behind the beaches. And so they came across
it's something of an epic journey, because they were bumping into Germans falling back from some of the beach positions. They were bumping into Germans moving towards the beach positions. So inland troops on reconnaissance, troops falling back. Again, that distance there, your red line, I just checked it on the map. It's about 15 or 16 kilometers, so a good 10 miles.
That's a long,
you're not going to
way,
be going in a straight line. You're going to be, you know, skirting around potential strong points and checking out for, you know, minefields. And it's one of those stories that really shouldn't be forgotten. And thanks to the work of, you know, John Forfile's excellent books on the Commando. But yeah, it's a really important story.
Yeah, no, definitely, and yes, and in fact, at some point they come across the Americans as well. So that I'm not sure who it is, but somewhere down in that west, before they get to Mont Cavalier, I think there's a chateau, and they actually touch base with the Americans as well, who are probably further east than they should have been. So they move up to Mont Cavalier. They go into a position there so that they can then move forward and take Port-au-Bassin. Headquarters forms up and stays behind there. I think they go forward and they request a surrender, see if they can get a surrender. I think they're taken forward by some gendarmes or something, and that's refused. So they then say, right, okay, we're going to have to go in and do this. So then they then go forward with 4 troops, and then they take Port-au-Bassin from behind. There's 4. Like I said, there's 4 different strong points they had to take, all very difficult in their own way. And they started with WM58 on the left, and made their way then down through the village. I think there was a medical centre, or RAP, that they took over, which was a German one.
Yep.
Which they took over. Headquarters, I think, went in there, and they took over the German RAP, and ended up treating both sides. And then they went through and took the rest of it. So the biggest, the most difficult part of this was going over the top, because as they went over the top, obviously most of the defences were pointing forward over the sea, the larger stuff, but everything else was protecting the rear. And also in the harbour were 2 flagships. In fact, it might have been 3 flagships. And they were able to look up and engage the guys as they came over the top of the hill. So they had it from every single angle. WN56, well, you can see from on the right-hand picture how high we're talking. So that one there, and then on the picture on the left, that's a still, I think, from a video I found on one of the websites, atlanticwall.co.uk. And you can see the Tobruk there. You can see I think it's an old French
tank turret.
Turret in a concrete and steel. Obviously, it's facing the wrong way, but the ones up on the hill weren't, and they come under fire from those as well. So it was a really, really, really difficult attack. And yeah, one of our most famous actions, which for a very long time, was overlooked. It was Horrocks that said, "It's doubtful whether, in their long distinguished history, the Royal Marines have ever achieved anything finer." Julian Thompson has got a lot of good words for it as well, who commanded us in the Falklands as our brigadier. So, it really is one of those things that we should look back on and be very proud of. And also the lessons learned, the planning, because they were very split up as well. Each troop had its own mission, had to get on and do its own thing. We weren't actually sure what they were going to come across. And everyone was different. Some were trench to trench, some were attacks on bunker systems, and some were direct assaults uphill.
To me, it's one of the your typical it was suited to the Commandos because it was 6 men there, 8 men there. A regular infantry battalion that kind of is used to working in full company strength would have found that fight in Port-en-Bessin a little bit difficult, because when you read the accounts by John Forfar in his brilliant book from I think what it's called now, but it is 4 guys there, 6 guys there, 8 guys there, which is exactly what Commandos do, isn't it? It's that small unit. You're there with literally 5 or 6 guys, and their performance through there, because it's a labyrinth of little kind of up and down, winding, cobbled streets in Port-en-Bessin. You say you've got the German positions on the high ground there, but then you've got to work your way up at them through the town. It's textbook stuff, but it's only textbook stuff if you're trained for that specifically, which of course the Commandos were. I wonder whether a regular infantry battalion would have got on so well.
I don't think so. They got too tied up in procedure. And the thing is, Julian Thompson was in a. We talk a lot about mission command, and Julian Thompson said, we didn't have a word for mission command until more recently in modern times. Even in the Falklands, it's something we've made up. We know what it is, but we were doing that. We were doing it because you had to work in small teams. You had to rely on, if the guys went down, if the officer went down, or sergeant or corporal went down, and really war is a corporal's battle initially, then you had to be able to take over. You had to make decisions. Which way are we going to go? Where's the threat? And yes, it was a very, very it's a classic Commando raid, and it's something that we study, but probably at too high a level. We should know about this, and I guess we do now, sort of the corporal and sergeant level, because it's that important. The lessons learned from it are that important. Actually, the other thing that we didn't get was a VC. So this guy on the right, I think his name's Curtis, lieutenant, I think, or captain. He should have got the Victoria Cross. He put up for a Victoria Cross, but never got one. So we dipped out. Right. So the last commando to be formed, and the last commando on my list is 4-8. So 4-8 formed up in Deal, like I said, March 1944. So only a few months before the invasion, because they needed that extra commando for the other beach. They landed at Aubin-sur-Mer, strong point, right on top of strong point WN-27. The Canadians had gone in before them, North Shore Regiment, and should have swept up the beach, but they just couldn't deal with WN-27 and some of the other stuff that was going on. The other problem is we landed in LCIs, which was crazy. The Colonel Moulton talks about it. Other people talk about it. I don't know if you've met Dennis Donovan. I interviewed Dennis. He was at DDay. He goes every year. He's been going every year for 4 or 5 years. He's 99. He's the last guy from 4-8 Commando still going. And he said, when the LCIs went in, when they got on them, they're like, "What are we doing in these? What is this? This is not a way to go to war," because they weren't designed to go in on a beach that wasn't taken. They were designed to follow up. And unfortunately, they went in on LCIs, and I think it was 3 that got hit, almost direct hits, and they lost a lot of guys. They got stuck on obstacles because of the state of the tide at that time and the defences. One got pounded because it was stuck. I think it was an LCM that came alongside, or no, it wouldn't have been LCM, LCT maybe came alongside and pulled the guys off, got them off. Else they would have got absolutely destroyed. Guys got drowned, fell in the water with their battle dress on, too far offshore, riptides. It was an absolute disaster. And it's not a way to go to war. The other thing I didn't know is that the 2 ramps on you got the 2 ramps that come down on the front. They would float. So there was 4 naval guys on the front who would drop the ramps, and their job was to drop the ramp, and they would run down the ramp and sit on the bottom of the ramp until the Commandos were far enough down to keep the ramp in the water, on the deck. And Dennis says that he was trying to get off. The rounds were coming in, couldn't get off, so he just threw himself over the side and ended up over the side of the boat rather than down the ramp, because it was such a disaster. And also they were exposed, so they went over the top of the bow and they were exposed all the way down these ramps until they could get off at the bottom. And anyone that's got off a boat, even an LCVP in 2 or 3 foot of water, it's an absolute nightmare, because everyone goes at a different pace in the water. you bog in. Some people bog in quicker than others. Some people got different equipment, slows you down. It's a very, very difficult thing to do, move through water. So yeah, they really got hit, and they lost a lot of guys. I can't remember what it was 25% casualties, just getting through. They then got to the sea wall, and when they got to sea wall, they got themselves underneath. And you imagine now, what they've been through. They weren't expecting any sort of major opposition, and they were against the sea wall. And it was Colonel Moulton who stood up and said, "Right, come on, boys, let's get going." And he got everyone up, and they moved out, and they moved forward. Went past the strong point, and then got into the hinterland behind. Their first RV was a woodland. I think 500-600 meters behind the beach, and they said they got shelled the whole way through, mortared the whole way through, but because it was boggy ground, there was just a few splinters here and there, but there wasn't any casualties. And then they started from there. Their first job was to go clear east, down from where they were behind 27, down to 26, which is Lagrune-sur-Mer, and then eventually they went down to WN6, Saint-Louis. But the big one was 26. So 26, here's the map that shows them going in. 26, I hope I got it, yes. So there's quite a famous picture of Colonel Moulton. We got it?
You had it in the top right corner of the previous one, wasn't it?
Ah, there he is, yeah. So this is them trying to clear WN26. So 26 was at the bottom of the road. It was on the sea. They'd come from. In fact, I might have it on this one. They'd come around the village, and they'd formed up in a farmhouse. It's in the built up area now. Formed up in a farmhouse as a headquarters, and then they were going to go forward and clear the beach. So they moved from south to north down the road. That picture there is them close to the Colonel Moulton, there, close to the strong point. And what happened is the first tanks that went in were Centaurs from 48, from Royal Marine Armed Support Group. They were close by, so they said, we can do this. They went down the road. They hadn't really worked with infantry before. They were learning as they went. And so there was no real support between the two. And they ran over a mine, lost a tank, and then had to withdraw. So there was no real sort of coordination between the two at this point. Funny enough, I've worked with tanks, and it's something you have to learn again, because the army are mechanized. They do it all the time. When we do it, we have to learn again how do we do it, because it's something we don't do, and it's a skill, and if they're just landed on D-Day, they've never worked with armor before together, and the armor's never worked with the infantry, then it's not just something you pick up. So anyway, so they then the next day they replanned. The Canadians came forward with an M2 and a Wolverine, and they tried again. Went around the corner, got hit, got mined, got hit, and eventually had to pull back again. So that attack didn't go in. Eventually, the Canadians took the strong point, and I imagine that was quite a mission. But you can see it down on the right. It's been smashed. It's been smashed there. That's without the gun in it. But yes, again, that was a lesson learned. I think the guys were learning all the time. Light infantry, light commandos against a strong point that's designed to counter armor and ships. And I'd survived the bombardment. So but yeah, one of 4/8's more famous actions. Dennis was there, so he tells a good story. I did a podcast with Dennis. He's a lovely bloke. He was just short of that, but he speaks very highly of Colonel Moulton, and he also speaks very highly of his troop commander, who was shot right next to him on this day, I think, as they were preparing to do this. Got shot by a sniper. So that's it, really. What I thought I'd do then is just sort of sum up what we did after. And if you go on the website, you can have a look. Basically, the Corps carried on all the way through Northeast Europe, all the way through. I think our last shot in anger was 47 Commando, but it was certainly 47's last shot in anger in Germany. And that was actually dissidents and displaced persons rather than Germans, I think. But yeah, 30 Commando went through and cleared a lot of the Kiel and places like that, found midget submarines and all sorts of stuff. And the rest of the commandos were involved in the crossing of the Rhine, crossing the Weser, Op Varity, Varsity, isn't it?
Varsity,
yeah. Blackhawk, clearing the Biesbosch, the Mass, and obviously Walcheren, which was our big one. So Walcheren was the biggest combined operations, you know, of the war, really, in this theatre anyway. And that involved a whole brigade of Royal Marine Commandos, and is, you know, really another story in itself, but it's pretty impressive. So that was really the Second World War, and in the end, like I said, there was 78,000 Royal Marines involved, and of course, in the Pacific, we continued until the very end, and a lot of these guys went east as well. We still remember some of these, so our units still in existence. 47 Commando has been reformed. It's an amphibious unit. I should know better because I used to be 539 Assault Squadron, but they've taken over that role, and 1st Assault Squadron, 47 Commando. So they remember Port Obersan, and that's been really useful because that's really ensured that there's now a Royal Marine presence, you know, at those commemorations and everything else. And they are the things we remember. The core memorable dates, the one we remember as a core, is landing in Normandy. So, you know, we remember that as a core. And the assault squadrons often, you will normally remember Neptune and the landings. So really, that's it. My last slide, which I must have uploaded the wrong set of slides. My last slide was supposed to be thank you very much, and some links. So Royal Marine History Society, if you want more information, if you don't want to go to my website, Royal Marine History Society, they're obviously the place, you know, the font of knowledge. And if any of them are listening to this now, they're probably laughing. And hopefully not taking too many notes. And they've also got a book coming out. So they've got a special publication coming out. If you remember, you get it for free, about D-Day. So it's about Royal Marines and D-Day. That comes out in a couple of months' time, I think. I asked for a cover, but they haven't got it yet. So, but it's due to come out. And the Royal Marines Museum. So the Royal Marines Museum used to be the very best museum to go, not that I'm biased, in the UK. It's been closed for a long time. It was in Eastney. Unfortunately, it's now going to go into the Naval dockyard, but we haven't got enough money to open it. So they're trying to raise money at the moment to open it. Hopefully that's going to happen, I think, this year or next. So if anyone's interested in that, that's also good to Google. And it's all available on my website. I've got everything on there.
Yeah, the link to the website is in the description. So, I mean, brilliant presentations. And I think, in a sense, they're victims of their own success and the fact they're spread out over so many places. You know, where the 6th Airborne perhaps have that identifiable, they were doing Pegasus Bridge, Melville Battery holding that ridge. You know, the Commandos, they start on the beaches, they move up to the ridge there. They've got, as you said, they've got tanks, they've got engineers, they're manning the guns on the ships. They're doing so many things that they're kind of easy to forget, you know, because we kind of want to break down Overlord into the big notes, the big, you know, the assault on Omaha Beach. And the other thing I wanted to mention earlier, and I'll mention now, is reminding ourselves again that our labeling of the beaches by their nationality is only a guide, not a definition. In that, you know, you made it clear there are Royal Marines on all the 5 beaches. There are Royal Marines supporting the American Rangers at Pointe du Hoc. There are American landing craft coming ashore on Gold. There are French Commandos on Sword. There are British 30 AU guys on Utah. The various maps we all have with the flags above the beaches, they're useful as a guide, but they don't explain actually that the Allies are not planning Overlord by, well, let's give that there to the British, that there to Canadians. They're dividing it by who is the best unit to support what we need in that sector. And if it happens to be vessels from another service, that's how they do it. So that those identifying labels are a guide, but they're actually kind of restricting our knowledge.
Very true. Yeah. Very true. Yeah. Well, thanks very much, Paul.
To bring you back again to carry on the story with the battle into Northwest Europe. We'll do that for you in the future. Again, check out Si's website. I'm back in a few hours' time with Andrew Whitmarsh talking about landing craft again, but how they were developed, the different types. That's the first of a 2-part show. Don't forget to click like and subscribe. Follow what we're doing on social media and consider becoming a patron. But right now, this is Paul Woodadge for World War II TV saying enjoy the 2 or 3 hours you've got before the next show. Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Cheers, mate.